Hey everybody, welcome back or welcome to the Science of Gaming series. I'm Taylor Johnson, and in this episode we speak with Dan DDK Kapadia. We talk about his background in pro gaming, his transition into commentating and podcasting, as well as his passion for human performance. We cover a lot of really great topics. Be sure to hang out towards the end where I do a summary recap. Thanks and enjoy.
Awesome, Dan. Appreciate you being here.
Of course, always. I mean, I'm excited to nerd out about stuff. You know me.
Yes, definitely. So if you could just share a little bit about yourself and your background and where you're at today.
Yeah. So I've been a professional commentator in esports for a little over 6 years. It kind of started out as me using my experience as a professional Quake player, being an ex-professional, and then starting out with Quake broadcasts. And I was brought on as like an analyst, and I'd been making a lot of content. And my big thing initially, which got me into all of this, was what have I been doing? Spending my time, doing the past decade before I got into commentary, and it was basically getting really good at video games and playing at an elite level and learning a bunch of different ones and getting really obsessed with what that journey to becoming elite, what that consists of and all the lessons learned along the way. And I figured, hey, I should share some of these lessons with other people, and that became the basis of my content and I think my real angle and my real brand as a commentator. And I started out with Quake, but then transitioned into Counter-Strike, which is what I'm most known for these days. And obviously, it's the biggest, one of the biggest esports. So that's what, most people will be familiar with Counter-Strike. And before that, yeah, I was just a nerd playing a lot of video games and trying to figure out what works, what doesn't work. And I think fitness was always something that and like martial arts was something that I was also always very interested in, and something that took a lot of my time as well. So those are always my two main focuses, and that's kind of all led me to where I am today.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate that. So could you talk a little bit about your journey as a pro player and maybe like what are the three biggest takeaways or lessons learned throughout that experience?
Yeah, this is it's a great question. I think it's always hard to, because there's so much, so many lessons. So it's always hard to choose ones I would go with as the most important. But the ones that spring to mind first, I think the first one is a concept I learned in my stint in the poker world, which is this idea of outcome dependency, and that we don't want to be outcome dependent. However, when we're in an environment and like, let's say that's something that's competitive and we want to improve, one of the most important things is having an understanding of how that path looks like. And for someone that's inexperienced and doesn't have a great grasp of the game yet, because these games are really complex, it takes a lot of years of experience and learning and analysis and introspecting to really understand how all the pieces fit together. So it's really easy by default to have bad success metrics and to be guided by those bad success metrics. And so that's this idea of outcome dependency. We don't want to be dependent upon the outcome, because the outcome is it can be very random because of a lot of different factors. And
Sure.
I think that when I was a young player, one of the things I struggled the most with was getting very angry. And this is kind of leading into my next point. And I had that kind of emotional distress because I wanted to be really, really good. I couldn't get the wins. I couldn't see the path to improvement. And that just made me tilt, basically. And I would have really big issues with tilt. So one of the things that really I find is very helpful is understanding how to reprogram our success metrics. And so therefore we are no longer outcome dependent, because, for example, if we have a bad game, we can then look at our decision-making processes and think, okay, effectively our mechanics, our aim, that's something that as we're human beings, there is a pretty big degree of variance to that. And we may miss some shots, but we can pretty much always put ourselves in the best positions to succeed. So did I do that throughout my course of the game? And even if I lost the game and had a bad fragging game, maybe I'm in my C game at that point. As long as I achieve that, I'm cool. And emotionally, I found that really helped with tilt. So those are kind of mixing and meshing these. And as a final point, as a third one, I would say it's really important to have routines to your practice and to have directed practice. And everything needs to be. It's one of the best ways to measure your improvement and where you're struggling and where your strengths are. And that's going to really help you to kind of really dial into how to use your time the most effectively. Because I do see a lot of people who will they'll throw out the idea of the 10,000 hours which is a very generic thing to throw out there. Obviously, I think Malcolm Gladwell popularized that with one of his
Sure.
books.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily, it's about using your time effectively. And you have to have, the best way to do that is to create some routines, build up your regimen, stick to it, and then you can alter things as they need to be altered. So those are the three things I would probably talk about.
Yeah, thanks for that. So what I'm hearing in those first two is a lot about reframing. So first, not being outcome dependent and reframing the context of really trying to be growth mindset and having it be about, okay, well, what were my wins? What were my losses? And really being introspective and saying, okay, well, how did I play? Maybe it wasn't my A game, but it was my B game or my C game. And there's still lessons to be learned in each one of those different categories. And the tilting thing, I think, is huge. I think for a lot of people, being able to clear those emotions and being able to notice a name when it comes up. And the quicker you can do that, differential from a stimulus and a response, the shorter the differential, then the more able you'll be able to get back into the game and get your head back into the game and not let yourself get too distracted. And then the last point about routines, I think, is so important. And we see this in traditional sports as well, where you have a lot of people getting their set routines, and it's one, people become creatures of habit, and two, there is the repetition and the consistency. I always use, BAMs, what is your bare ass minimum that you can do every day? And what that does is it builds up consistency over time. And then that steamrolls into habits, lifestyle change. And this isn't just lifestyle for life outside the game, but it's also within the game. And those two are interwoven. So I really appreciate you saying that. So talk to me a little bit about your time spent as a commentator. You're obviously around some of the best players in the world, traveling all over the world. What are some of the pros doing? Like, what are you seeing them do in terms of, pre-game, post-game, maybe in between matches? I'm curious to learn a bit more about that.
Yeah, so it's a funny one because a lot of there are so many different types of people. I was going to say players, but I guess just people in general, and how they approach these different problems and where they're coming from in terms of their background. And it's so diverse. You can have people there are certain people that are extremely tenacious, and they're the kind of people that it doesn't matter what life throws at them. They just want to get X result, and they will do whatever they can to get there. They may not be talented necessarily, but for whatever reason, becoming a pro player and being competitive and achieving things in that realm is the most important value that they have, and they'll just get there. And that type of player is an interesting one because that's the kind of person that's going to put in a lot of work, and they're going to be very analytical, and they'll be able to articulate things very well. And there'll be constantly this kind of student mindset, and the funny thing as well is that you get the complete opposite too, where I've spoken to so many players and they're so good. Some of them are so smart in how they play the game. Like, you watch them play the game, they have great mechanics. Sure, they can play on the elite level in that sense, and even if they weren't a smart player, they would still be able to make it just off of that alone. But then the defining characteristic is this guy's really smart. But because, again, some of these players are so talented and young, if they don't spend a lot of that time having to work really hard going through all these barriers because they don't necessarily have as much innate talent as some of the other players, they won't be as articulate. They'll just see a problem. They'll be like, well, the way that I've solved problems is just by putting more hours. For them, it works fine because they have that whatever it is in their heads, in their brain, that just kind of their cognitive abilities, when presented with the variables within that arena specifically, their brain just gets it. So it's a spectrum between those two types. And I think we've all seen that the most elite players in the world are those people that can actually have an incredible work ethic and very analytical and are extremely talented on top of that. But those kinds of players are rarer. But generally speaking, it ranges massively. There are players who want to spend no time before a big match at all practicing or getting on the servers and shooting bots and practicing their aim. There are some players, like I spoke to Valdik on my podcast, and he said, what I like to do is I like to avoid doing any warm up for my mechanics, but what I do is I sit there and I watch a game, I'll relax, and I'll visualize. I'll visualize all the plays I'm going to make. I'll visualize the situations I'm going to be in. I'm going to just kind of make sure I'm still in that kind of relaxed mindset. I'm just preparing myself for all the things that I'm going to run into in the game. And that's like how he likes to do it. And he's definitely one of the best players in the world. And then have people that do love to just like smash bots for ages and stuff. So it's so diverse. And I think this really speaks to this idea that everyone wants the magical answer, the thing that works, but it is invariably just always about experimentation, personal experimentation. And I found like in every field of my life that is the same thing. The answer is never easy. You got to like actually go out and try stuff and commit to trying things for significant periods of time to see if it works for you. So yeah, I can't give you a direct answer, but
no, I think that's great. I mean, that, you know, we've talked about this before on other podcasts and just, you know, in passing. And I think what's super interesting, this kind of ties back into your third point about routine is, you know, once you reach a certain level, even along the way on that path, you need to ask yourself, are you successful because of or in spite of everything you've done? And that's a really hard question to answer. But what that does is if you have that growth mindset, it opens up the opportunity to really examine your day-to-day, your routine. And there is a point of diminishing returns and figuring out what that threshold is. There is an upper and lower threshold, and there is a maximum operational output, and they fluctuate. You know, the more you can increase your maximum output, the more operational output you have to work within that. And in terms of, you know, the pregame warm up or postgame cool down type of stuff and being able to do the debriefs, you know, an after action review and go over what went well, what went wrong, lessons learned, big wins moving forward, that's all very individualized. And I saw that working with the pro players, you know, with the guys at Optic and League of Legends and Houston Outlaws, same sort of thing. Everybody had their kind of set routine. So it's very individualized. And I think for the young players coming up, it's an invitation for them to try different things. And I think a lot of times people get stuck into this mold or this idea that they have to do just one thing and they just grind and that's what they do. Or they see somebody else do something successful and it's this confirmation bias of like, oh, well, you know, this individual does it this way, so I need to do it that way. And that's not necessarily true. And the same goes with different learning styles and different learning models. I mean, there's research that's coming out that shows, you know, with perceptual learning, you know, like you need to sleep. There's only a certain amount of window where you can get great practice in, and then you need to sleep to be able to crystallize that information and consolidate it. And I think a lot more people are starting to get in tune with that. And that's one of our big pushes with what we're trying to do with this education series is start getting people to think outside the box and try different things and see what really works for them. I think that's a great point.
I have another quick add-on to that, actually.
Sure.
So, because I think there's definitely two aspects to this too. Like when we're talking about the pre-game, post-game, like, you know, practice and so on. I think there is a difference that's important about between what makes you just feel good and feel good in the game, and what makes you improve. Because those two things aren't necessarily the same. And for example, like the pre-game stuff, I think it's all about like supporting yourself emotionally so you can feel good. And so I think that's what a lot of people are looking for, about feeling good. Because a lot of, you know, it's like the old, I don't know what there's like an old quote about, you know, the game was won, you know, in practice, and then the day before the game was won, that kind of stuff. And I think that's another interesting topic. And I did actually do a podcast with a guy called Stico very recently. And I'll just make this really quick because I thought this was really cool. Stico is someone that was on a very, like a top 5 level elite team in 2017, 2018. But then he was one of the support players. And he, unfortunately, as a support player, doesn't get as much love in terms of his market value when that team broke up. So he kind of went back out there and he had to reinvent himself. And interestingly, he'd been listening to some of my podcasts and picked up some bits of information that were actually quite compelling. One of the most important things that he took from it was the A game, B game, C game stuff from Jared Tendler, and also the journaling, which kind of goes back to your point about being able to create reference points. And he understood through journaling, and he was describing this to me, that he saw correlations between his performance and his emotional states. And that was a predictable correlation he found. And so then he was able to more effectively have more consistent and better performances by understanding himself through journaling and writing things down in that process. And what he's doing right now is he's going from a support player to the other end of the spectrum. He's become like a hard carry player, and he's doing a really good job at it. So yeah, that's another, journaling is another big tip for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that as well. A lot of the pro players that I work with on an individual basis and a team basis, I always encourage them to start a journaling practice and really and capture just a few things. I mean, the first part of that is tracking your sleep. You know, how much do you sleep? What was the quality of your sleep? What's your mood on that day? And then really thinking about after your training session, journaling and kind of doing a debrief for yourself and picking out those reference points that you talked about. And then also, what was your rate of perceived exertion? like how hard was that training session for you, or how difficult was that game for you? Because you can actually correlate those back to your sleep, your mood. And if you start to look at that over, consistent basis, you have acute and chronic loading. So if you look at like compare 7 to 21 days over a period of time, you can start to see trends, and that could directly tie back into your gameplay. And it's just a really good opportunity for you to be more self-aware of what's going on, because you may be like, wow, I totally just crashed in this game. Well, what happened like 3 days before? Oh, well, I wasn't sleeping well. My mood was down. Every match that I played, every scrim that I played was extremely difficult for me. That's valuable to know, because then that opens up the conversation with the coaches and also with yourself to be like, okay, well, what needs to change? Like, what needs to be different to allow me to really optimize and continue my forward progression?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's very easy when you don't have that information to be able to make up all kinds of stories to yourself as to why things may or may not happen. So
Yeah,
actually kind of lifting the veil and deciding to actually get the information is definitely a game changer. And I think it would be negligent for any pro not to do it, especially if they're on a pro team and have the support of people around them that can help them with those habits. And that's also a habit that is accessible to anybody as well. You don't need any support staff for that. So yeah, for sure, it's so important.
exactly. Yeah, totally. I wish we had more time, because there's so many more points I want to hit on with that.
Yeah, for sure.
But let's, for the sake of time, we're going to move it forward. So the last one I want to talk about is, you have a passion for health and wellness. You always have, and most recently getting healthy again with your shoulders, and really kind of getting back into your training routine. I mean, how has your journey in health and wellness impacted your playing as well, both in game and out of game?
Yeah, I think when I established, I think what was my most effective routine, where my sleep was optimized and everything else, the fitness played a really big part in that. Because what I was doing is I was making sure that I understood the kind of currencies that I had and what I was spending in the sense of what the currency of focus and energy, and where is that best spent. And it's interesting because I did discover that in terms of exercise, it was really critical in helping me be more focused and to get a better energy and a better result from my practice. Because not only does it make you feel good, I also find that it combats a lot of other things. So for example, sometimes you won't have the best sleep, but exercise is amazing because I think just from a blood flow perspective, getting your entire body moving, like sweating a bit, that actually helps with a lot of the kind of grogginess that you may or may not be experiencing. It kind of cuts through a lot of the haze. And even if that day you might have a little bit less energy or focus, it gives you this ability to at least have, for me, I found like a good few hours of practice. And I found that if you're already playing on a pretty high level and your aim and mechanics are there, and it's just more about maintenance for that, it's more about having the mental clarity, because the gains you're going to mostly be making are actually in having the ability to analyze what's going on. So seeing what happens in terms of you putting yourself in the server, what is the result, in terms of like, what are you picking up analytically? But also I found that it made me more stable emotionally, because I'm in a generally like better state. It meant that a more kind of emotional neutral state gave me a better analytical mind, because I'm more objective in how I assess what's happening. And it also, there's a lot of situations in game, I find that clarity is extremely important, because we can get emotionally very invested in how we're playing. So we might get very emotionally invested in a play we're about to make. But one of the mindsets you need to have is to always just understand that I'm going to crunch the numbers on this situation, and this is the play I'm going to make. Okay, something happens before I could actually make that play, and the situation is slightly different. I'm going to crunch numbers again. It's a different situation. That's cool. And it doesn't matter, like that initial decision of like, I want to make this play. It's gonna be really cool. I'm gonna get all these kills. I'm gonna do all these cool things. Like, you don't get as invested in those situations. I just found a general better clarity and a better emotional state. And the other thing too is it gave me a better sensitivity and awareness of my focus and energy. So I understood better when it was starting to wane. And that's kind of how I program myself, talking about understanding how we individualize our training regimens, because then I know, okay, my best moments to play are within this window, and okay, what are low energy activities that don't require as much focus, but I can get maximum value from? Because if I'm going to play past that point, I'm not going to get maximum value from the experience. I might as well try to get a better experience that's more efficient in terms of the energy that I have, read a book or do this or do that, or
Yep.
especially because if we're thinking about sleep, we're thinking about turning off the screens, we're thinking about reducing the light and stress, and we want more relaxing activities to maximize the sleep, which, as you said, like helps to crystallize, especially all the technique work that you're doing, but all the decision making, and it also puts you in a better mindset, I think, to internalize the decisions that you've made, and it helps you to avoid running into bad patterns, because that tends to be where most pro players suffer. They practice too much, and they lock themselves into bad decision-making patterns, and then it's very difficult to break away from them. So I feel like exercise is really fundamental in the emotional and mental clarity that then leads into the most and best practice. I feel like it's inseparable to a good routine. You have to have it. And I found only great benefits from it.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. You touched on so many great points. I think just the fact that exercise releases endorphins, so it's those feel-good hormones, that is huge. The circulatory effect. I mean, look, we're talking about, professional gamers or aspiring pro gamers, and their brain is their moneymaker. Their ability to perceive and process and execute fine motor skills at rapid speed is dependent upon how well the brain is going to be functioning, and improving your circulation is only going to be an additive to that. And I've always encouraged players to get at least 20 minutes a day of some sort of physical activity. It's going to improve circulation. It's going to improve activation of BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is kind of like turning the lights on for your brain. So many benefits that, we could do a whole other segment on that. And the other part that I really appreciate you touching on is the emotional stability that comes with exercise. What's interesting is, once people start to get in a routine, it becomes part of just their lifestyle in general, and it becomes like this outlet. It's this stress reliever. People call it working out, but it's really working in. You're internally working your body. It's this state of constant evolution of yourself, and then that energy gets pushed out to the world, and that's how you view the world very differently. And so once people kind of get in a consistent routine, what happens is, all of their parts of their life start to kind of fit into place. And it doesn't necessarily have to start with the exercise. Maybe it's starting with your sleep, or maybe it's start with your nutrition. Because if you could start to feel better, whichever one of those buttons, dials, levers, and knobs you can push, pull, twist, turn to start you feeling better is going to get you going in the right direction. Then all the other parts kind of fit together.
I think there's if I was going to add one small thing on top of it as well, is I think it's really beneficial with exercise, it can be a lot of different things. In my case in particular, it's always been, lifting and calisthenics, and in the past, like martial arts. And what I think is really cool is habituating and rewarding yourself for getting in a mindset of goal oriented activities, because it's very goal oriented. And that's also how you should look, as we covered previously, that's how you should look at your practice as an athlete as well, whether that be in a traditional sport or in an e-sport. And so I think it encourages that mindset. So I think that's another reason why I particularly like it a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so that's a really good distinction there. And part of that too is, with goal setting, there are outcomes and behaviors, and it's different. There's a distinction between an outcome and a behavior, and the behaviors are what feed into the outcomes. And I think for a lot of people, what's interesting is when people say, "Oh, I want to be the best player in the world," the conversations that I have is like, "Cool. So what's that going to take?" Well, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, cool. So let's map that out. So what's your 1-year goal, or what's your someday goal? Let's map that out. What's your 1-year goal? Okay, let's be clear and specific. What's your 6-month goal? What's your 3-month, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day? What can you do right now? Because when you do that and you reverse engineer, you basically create that roadmap like you're talking about, like that path, that journey. And I think for a lot of people, they get caught up on the outcome, but they don't really take the time to think about, okay, well, what behaviors need to be true to feed into that outcome? And that's a huge learning experience for everybody. And I appreciate you brought that up.
Yeah, for sure. It's as long as anything we can do to get more people exercising, it's always good.
Yeah, I mean, exercising, and then also just taking care of mental health too. And that's, for myself, that's been a huge passion of mine, is encouraging mental health. And I think we didn't talk about it, but meditation is a huge part of my own practice. And I know a lot of other people meditate as well. And that's a huge opportunity for you to be able to sit with yourself, close your eyes, disconnect from the external world, and really start to think about and envision, your future self. Because a lot of people, it's like you have these images. Some people meditate and they try to just clear the mind. I choose to meditate and to focus on the person I want to become. And what does that experience feel like? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What are the emotions that are drawn or come from that? And that's an incredibly powerful experience as well. And that also ties into working out and exercise and nutrition. It actually ties into all three different subjects that we just talked on.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree that exercise is so extremely meditative, and it is also performance in many senses. And I know that for me, I always channeled myself as a I guess competitor into the exercise, because there's obviously all kinds of different ways you can do it. I think a lot of people who get into something that's competitive, they're doing it because they want to live in that discomfort because they're chasing growth, and that's the two things are inseparable, discomfort and growth, unfortunately. And with exercise as well, like obviously it depends on which modalities you're using, but you can exercise with poor form, or you can do it with poor energy or with a poor preparation. It's exactly the same as how you would try to become really great at any kind of a sport. Like the preparation elements and the understanding and the training and the attention to detail and the analysis and even the journaling to some extent. The championship kind of mindset is applicable to it very directly. And I think there's this, I love that kind of physical energy that you get from it in that sense. You're not fighting. And I think fighting is maybe the ultimate kind of version of this, where it's because you're almost in this fight or flight, like you're someone who's challenging you directly physically. That brings out that kind of competitive and primal instinct, I think, the most. But I think ultimately, to me, the closest I get to that now is like with lifting, like with a really, really hard sets or like really hard workout, and just like kind of pushing myself past this, whatever the kind of level of stress I'm going through, and just pushing through it and trying to achieve that. And that's like a training for the what I call the championships mindset, or the Mamba mentality, or whatever you're going to call it. And so I think it's also very important to constantly find ways for us to challenge ourselves, and exercise is an easy win because we get a reward, we get the endorphins and everything, and you get to see a change in your body. So there's so many cool rewards from it too. So it's definitely worth looking into for those who haven't yet found a love for it. I actually don't believe that there are people that actually truly hate it. I think they just haven't found the right thing yet. But
it's fun. It's finding what moves you. I mean, it could be taking a 5-minute walk, or a 20-minute walk, or it could be lifting weights. It could be riding a bike. I mean, my biggest invitation to people is try a lot of things and just see what moves you. Maybe it's yoga, maybe it's martial arts, maybe it's Tai Chi. Whatever gets you out and gets you moving in some capacity is going to be good for you, for your performance and for your longevity. And that's always been the conversation I've had with players is, look, this is not just about your gaming performance. This is about your longevity, because that means more money for you and more money for your families. So let's start to, take apart all the different variables that need to be accounted for, and then let's start piecing them together for you as the individual. Awesome. Well, it's about it for us on time, man. I feel like we can jam out forever.
I had the next thing all ready to go.
I know. So we'll cap it there. We'll definitely do another one. And so where can people find out more about you? You got an awesome podcast. Share about that.
I think the easiest thing for people to do is just go, if they use Twitter or Instagram, DDK esports, or one word, is where you can find my Twitter or Instagram, and pretty much everything that I'm doing, I'll be tweeting about, and I have other links for socials on there. So that's probably the best place to find my stuff.
Awesome. Well, thanks, brother. I want to acknowledge you for all the work that you're doing in the space, all that you've done and continue to do right now. And I'm fired up for the path that you're on, and having a real impact in the space, in gaming and health and wellness. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Taylor. I mean, likewise, a quick, I know you're doing the outro right now. I'm going to mess it all up, even though I myself am like a podcast host. So I really appreciate that. I'm completely ruining this for you, but,
Go for it, dude.
But, as a small bit of backstory, Taylor and I connected because I saw him as this like guy from traditional sports, the sports performance coach, walking into this green room. I'm like, who is this non-esports person? And I was like, oh, that's actually very interesting. And it's like, would you want to do a podcast? And he agreed to it. And then we both found out that all the stuff that he just said to me, like, I mirrored that back to you. Like, I'm really excited for all the things that you're doing, all the stuff you're bringing in from traditional sports. I think you're doing really great work. So I'm just happy to be a part of it. So thanks for bringing me on.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. All right. Cheers.
Thanks.
Hey, everybody. I had an absolute blast recording this session with Dan. Just a quick recap. We talk about his journey as a pro player and 3 of his biggest takeaways from his experience of playing. His take on managing tilt and reprogramming successful metrics, looking at outcome dependency models for success and progress, talk about the large variation in professional players' routines and what it really means to have a growth mindset. And then from that, how do you set up pre-game, post-game routines that allow you to build habits for successful gameplay for a long period of time? We go over the benefits of journaling and self-examination, and as well as how health and wellness played a huge role in Dan's progression as an individual while he's playing and how much it impacts his performance to this day. We hope you enjoyed. Be sure to check out all the show notes and all the links to find Dan on social media, as well as we'll have some blog posts coming out shortly after. Thanks and have a good day.